All right, so in this section, we're going to talk about certain things related to the legal landscape with subsidized housing. How does it affect subsidized housing? Does it affect subsidized housing? The subsidized housing model, does it affect certain properties? And are there any, one thing I get asked a lot is we're always being asked if we participate in affordable housing traditionally or the subsidized housing model, are there any benefits that circumvent or help mitigate some of the legal aspects of housing in our city and in any other states. So let's start with rent control. So I think it goes without saying what rent control is. Obviously in California, certainly in Los Angeles County, the city of Los Angeles has rent control, and many other cities like Pasadena, Glendale, Burbank, Long Beach, they all have their own form of rent control. And so the way around that is what it is. If it's a building built before, I believe, 1978, it's under rent control. If it's multifamily, it affects multifamily. There are some instances where even single family homes that are under 5 units also have rent control on them. We have some clients who have properties that are even fourplexes or 2 homes on a lot that are for rent and are rent controlled. So it's a thing. I will say this, that a lot of clients do tend to gravitate towards investing in rent control properties. I believe it's because the barrier of entry is obviously a little bit easier. It's a lower income property. It's a cheaper property. Traditionally, right now in California and Los Angeles, everything's expensive, but in normal conditions, a lot of people buy rent control properties and then rent to lower income populations. There's 2 schools of thought there. I do like the strategy of acquiring the property at a lower cost, and then certainly you're going to rent to a lower income population. I think it is a perfect opportunity. I certainly would promote, if you're going to invest in lower grossing properties that are going to bring in lower rents just by of their geography and the rent control, and the rent can only be raised a very modest amount every year, that you certainly incorporate the subsidized housing model into that strategy, because the truth of the matter is that lower income populations often have more complications when it comes to being able to sustain rent. So I would certainly say if you have a portfolio, or a client has a portfolio of rental properties that are under rent control, certainly incorporating, if not maximizing, the subsidized housing model in rent control properties is definitely a strategy that I would absolutely say would be a smart move. Evictions, big one. How does the subsidized housing model affect evictions? How does it help when it comes to the situation of evictions? I mean, evictions are going to happen regardless, whether you're renting to market tenants, whether you're investing in or building a traditional affordable housing development that has a covenant on it for affordability, or if you're just incorporating or adopting the subsidized housing model into your existing portfolio, whether it's rent control or not, doesn't matter. Evictions are an inevitability. There is nothing in affordable housing or the subsidized housing model that prevents evictions, but in the subsidized housing model, certainly our subsidized housing model at our firm, there are some strategies through relationships, through strong partnerships and relationships with the government entities and nonprofit organizations that are helping the subsidized tenants, that can avoid an eviction for said subsidized tenants, as well as the owner, landlord, investor, builder. A quick, very simple example would be certain agencies that our firm have long-standing relationships with, where it's a trade-off. Our firm delivers to them real estate for the purposes of their mission, which is helping folks who are suffering or experiencing homelessness or on the verge of homelessness. When their program participants who are subsidized are housed through our clients' properties that are participating in our subsidized housing model, if a participant were to find themselves in a difficult situation where they're now falling behind on rent again because some life event has happened that has changed their circumstance, it is through the subsidized housing model, the component in there that is building those strong relationships with the organizations whose job it is to administer the social services and help those folks. Through those relationships, we are able to come up with creative and productive resolutions that work out better for the tenant who is now falling behind, which may include assisting with a relocation to a more suitable housing intervention so that they can avoid yet another mark on their record. This is also good for the owner, property owner, investor, landlord, because now they're saving on all the rigmarole and headache and legal fees of an eviction. They're able to now make the unit ready for the next subsidized housing tenant. So it's a win-win for everyone through this model. So in that sense, it's not a magic pill. It doesn't fix everything. It doesn't always play out that way. And it's certainly not a guarantee, but it's a much better strategy that helps everyone involved, both the owner, the tenant, and the organizations who are on a mission to help society and help the folks who need housing. It's a win-win for all three, and it is only achieved through our subsidized housing model and those strong relationships. Now, I'm often asked if there's a lot of misconception here, and I think it's important that I'll just briefly touch on it. There is a misunderstanding and a perception if a tenant were subsidized through, let's say, the federal programs like the Housing Authority's Section 8, that if they violate terms of their lease agreement in any way, whether that's not paying rent or any other term in their lease that is not being performed on, that the Section 8 system, the Housing Authority, will actually revoke their voucher and remove the tenant from housing. That's absolutely not the case. There are many instances where, due to behavior of a tenant and non-performance, they may lose their Section 8 benefits. A good way they could do that is if they failed to comply with their annual inspection with the Housing Authority. The Housing Authority has the right to revoke their Section 8 voucher benefits. That is actually the worst case scenario, because now the tenant will still be there in the unit without a means of paying rent. So now they're going to face an eviction, and now the landlord is stuck with a tenant who's non-performing. Again, through the subsidized housing model, part of what our firm would do in that situation is help this person, this tenant, and the landlord, educate them on the resources out there that exist that they can reconnect with, bridge that gap, so to avoid the horrible inevitability of the scenario that I just proposed. So that's just one example there, but it's all through creative relationships and productive relationships. So another aspect affects the subsidized housing model, or the model itself is affected by, is the requirements and the regulations. There are requirements from HUD at the federal level, there are state requirements, and then county and municipal. Now, many of the traditional regulations that any investor is familiar with that affect any type of housing, from your single family home to multifamily, regardless of an affordability aspect or a subsidized aspect, many of those still apply and are not changed if a piece of real estate is either running as a traditional affordable housing development, or it's a traditional standard market piece of real estate that is participating in our subsidized housing model. That doesn't change most of the time. However, particularly with tenants whose subsidy is through those federal programs like Section 8, through a housing authority, either through the city or the county, there are regulations and standards that are inspected and expected every single year. So particularly with Section 8, there are inspections annually, and they call them housing and quality standards. So essentially the home must be in full conformity, the dwelling residence, whether it's a home or an apartment, must be in full conformity with state and local laws and building standards and code, up to code. So windows have to be at the proper height. Obviously, fire life safety equipment has to be working, your fire extinguishers in the common areas, your smoke detectors, but there aren't necessarily very specific items for subsidized housing outside of the norm. But a few things that a lot of people don't realize if you're going through if you're going to apply the subsidized housing model and you're participating particularly subsidized tenants whose subsidy is a Section 8 voucher, one thing that a lot of people miss is if a room is being considered a bedroom, it must have a closet. But what if it's built without a closet? A lot of units are built that way now to save space. The solution to that is there just must be a place to store clothing and belongings. So a good, and this is just a little, to have the unit come with an affixed dresser or mobile closet that is affixed to the wall, and it can be affixed very simply with a couple screws, but otherwise it's removable. That satisfies the need for closet space. There are a few other things that come up, but certainly the most basic items oftentimes are not too difficult to achieve. That the room, the unit, the home, the apartment is livable and safe, that all the windows close and lock and the doors close and lock and all the electrical outlets have their covers, and there's no massive plumbing issues or leaks, and there's no pests running around. And most of the time you'll be fine investing in a property. It doesn't have to be absolutely luxury. Oftentimes, actually, what we see and what we get asked about is, how nice do I have to make my unit? We just had the question just the other day, well, I want to ask the housing authority to pay their subsidized tenants rent at a much higher level than the comp support because I'm going to provide plenty of parking and we're going to provide a pool or just different creature comfort amenities. That really doesn't matter. When it comes to the subsidized housing model, you can keep it as simple as a nice livable condition living space dwelling without having to overextend yourself with extravagant renovations. It just needs to be nice, simple, and livable. But in the eyes of the housing authorities and certainly in the eyes of all the other agencies that are helping people find housing, they just want nice, livable communities. It does not have to have a pool or parking or outside of what is mandated by law. It does not have to have laundry in the unit. That would be fantastic if there's laundry in the unit or on the property, but it's not mandatory. What affects your rent that you're going to request from the subsidies themselves is that the unit is livable and that it conforms to all laws, and that it is a place where a person can call home comfortably without fear of safety issues.